George Gopen here. Today we're going to look at the first part of the third movement of T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. Before I jump into it, I feel a comment might be necessary on the color of my eye patch today. You see, I sent away for a package of eye patches. They came in 5 different colors, and I've been using them to coordinate with content. But my friends and my advisors all hate this flesh-colored eye patch. They say it looks like half your face is missing. It's really quite terrible. And one person said it just looked too fleshly. And that word is a literary word. It has to do with pre-Raphaelite poetry. Poetry of the fleshly school they were attacked for being. I'm wearing it because movement 3 of The Wasteland is by far the most fleshly. It delves into sex gone bad in the wasteland in so many different ways, all of them unpleasant, off-putting, that it seemed that an eye patch, which seemed to send that message or at least give that experience as well, would be appropriate. Movement 3 of The Wasteland is its longest. But you ain't seen nothing yet if you think this is what Eliot wrote. Eliot, as I mentioned many hours ago, left London for 3 months to go to a psychiatric rest place in Switzerland on Lake Geneva, where he hoped to regain his nerves, which he apparently did. And he was finishing up The Wasteland while he was there, and he sent the manuscript to his good friend, an extraordinary critic, Ezra Pound. And Pound, back in 1922, saw that there was a brilliant poem underneath all this junk that Eliot had sent him. So he took the manuscript, and you can purchase this for yourself if you want to, even in paperback. It was published in 1972 or so. They found the manuscript in 1971 after it had been missing for decades. And they printed it with the manuscript photographed on one page and then a typescript of it on the facing page so that you can see it all. And every time Ezra Pound made a comment, get a page with a few comments on it, you'll see the comments in the manuscript in Pound's handwriting, and then on the printed page, you'll see them in red. This is a fascinating document, folks, because Eliot's Wasteland manuscript that he sent to Pound was twice the length of the poem we are currently exploring. Twice the length. It was what Pound took out of it that made it into the brilliant poem that it is. So it really should be The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot and Ezra Pound. You'll recall he dedicated it to Ezra Pound, complimenting him as Emilio Fabro, the better craftsman. Well, movement 3 here is where the largest number of lines were cut. He cut 71 lines just for movement 3. Pound did. Eliot's section here, his movement here, was written almost entirely in rhymed couplets, a form used in the 18th century. Most of Alexander Pope's extraordinary poems were in rhymed couplets, although they were all iambic pentameter, 5 potential stresses in every line. Eliot writes mostly with 4 beats in every line. But Eliot didn't like counting beats or talking about iambs or trochees, so We could say, well, forget about that for Eliot. We can't, because the beats actually function. What he wanted to forget about was the rules, and he didn't forget about the rules. But what he did sometimes affects how the poem stretches. So every once in a while, we'll be looking at meter. In our next session, we'll take a look at the section that is in the middle of this movement and is the dead center of the poem as a whole. And it is the incident between the typist home at tea time and the young man carbuncular. Talk about sex gone bad in the wasteland. And we will stop at the beginning of that to do a little bit of a look at what Pound cut out that changed all of this. He essentially told Eliot, rhyme couplets was good for the 18th century and it don't work so good now. So I'm going to cut out huge swathes of this rhyme couplet stuff. And in other spaces, I'm going to muck around with individual lines that will undo the throbbing pounding of A, B, B, the rhyme scheme, C, C, D, D. It doesn't fit what you're trying to do. So we will get back to that, but it's good to have a mind to the fact that Pound emptied lots of stuff out. In the lines we're going to be looking at today, they have meaning as much by juxtaposition with the lines around them as they do within the line itself. What this line functions as is different from what this line says. It includes what it says, but it's more than that. And much of it in this section has to do with allusion. We've talked about this. I've talked about this with you before. Usually you don't have to know the Eliot allusion in order to make sense of what he's doing at the moment. Usually, if you do know where he's talking about, and you go there, there's something of value you can bring back from there to this moment, and it makes this moment richer. And that's a fabulous use of allusion. In the passage we're looking at today, I must say he gets really close to going over the edge where that's concerned. Because if you know what all the sources are for almost every line, not quite, by 80% of the lines, then we're going to look at, and you bring that stuff back in, it gets richer and more clever and more powerful in its message. And if you don't know those sources, this passage can seem pretty much a jumble. So let's take a look. Let me bring up the text for you. There we go. It's called The Fire Sermon. I advise you, drinking iced coffee from a wine glass is superior to drinking it from other vessels. That's just a helpful note. It has nothing to do with TSL. The Fire Sermon is a reference to a famous sermon of the Buddha. And the general message of the Fire Sermon is that fire stands for human desire in general, not just sexuality, but desire in general. And that if you can get rid of desire in your life, you can reach towards purification. A connection to God. Well, this sounds somewhat familiar. I mean, we've had references already to the Grail search, the quest for the Grail. And Sir Percival, who is pure, is going to be somebody who can actually succeed. He goes off and meets King Amfortas, who's sexually damaged for his sinning, and he's wounded and he can't get over his wound. But the sexually pure Percival comes along, which translated into German becomes Parsifal, Wagner's last and longest opera, if not his greatest, according to this listener. We have this theme all the way through. Every time we bump into Wagner in the Wasteland, this theme gets implied. So that's our topic for the third movement. The third movement is Eliot's fire sermon about getting rid of desire. Here we go. The river's tent is broken. The last fingers of leaf clutch and sink into the wet bank. The wind crosses the brown land unheard. The nymphs are departed. Sweet Thames, run softly till I end my song. I'm going to leave that text up for a while because we want to look at bits and pieces of it. You start off broken. The river's tent is broken. What's broken? The whole world is broken. This is post-World War I. Everything is broken. We're at a river. We've had bodies of water before. Fear death by water. Ferdinand down on the beach, thinking that everybody has drowned in the tempest. Full fathom 5. Those are pearls that were his eyes. A lot of water, but the major problem of the wasteland is not enough water. The river's tent is broken. What is the river's tent? You think of, or does part of our mind think of a tent by the river and that it's been abandoned? Why would one put a tent by the river? Well, to inhabit it temporarily. Why would one be temporarily by a river where you would want an enclosure? The river's tent is broken. The last fingers of leaf clutch and sink into the wet bank. Do you remember that line at the beginning of the second stanza graph of the whole poem back in the first movement? What are these roots that clutch? Well, there we had roots clutching into a dry land. And here we have last fingers of leaf clutching and sinking into a wet bank. Remember, wet bank. We're going to encounter it again. The wind crosses, notice a little bit of sound repetition. Last leaf, clutch, cross, wet, wind, bank, brown, land to go with last and leaf. There's too much of it for it not to somehow arrest the ear. The mind's ear. The ear is mind. And clutch and sink into the wind. The wind crosses the brown land. Here's the wasteland, the dried land, unheard. We've got invisible things. The nymphs are departed. Well, who are these nymphs? There's a river. Everybody knows rivers have nymphs. The river nymphs. Can you think of any river nymphs that might be attached to this poem so far? Who wrote about the most famous of the river nymphs? You guessed it, Wagner. In his 4-opera series, The Ring of the Nibelungen, 4 enormous operas, together they're 19 hours of listening. They're spectacular. They're overwhelming to start with, of course. We're going to talk more about those 4, which is why I stop for a moment on them now. We begin with the Rhine River in Germany. Well, separating Germany from France, usually. And there are these swirling strings that suggest waves. But beneath or around them is the note E flat, which is held by part of the orchestra for the first several minutes of this very long opera. You're grounded in this river. And indeed, the whole 4 plays are grounded in what happens here in Das Rheingold, the gold of the Rhine. There are 3 characters we meet right off. Guess who they are? The Rhine maidens, the nymphs of the Rhine. And they're having a good old time and playing along, and their job is to guard important gold ring. And along comes a nasty little dwarf, Alberic, who's trying to hit on the 3 Rhine maidens. They're very sexy, very attractive, and they're having a lot of fun playing. He wants to come and play. And they just laugh at him because he's short and he's malshapen and he's ugly and he's not nice and attractive in any way they can see. And they just laugh at him. Well, the lore has it that they cannot lose the gold of the Rhine to anyone unless that person has forsaken love. But we're not talking about Parsifal or Sir Percival here. We're talking about the opposite. Not someone who's kept himself pure, but someone who is desirous, there's that word, desire, who is desirous of the gold and the pleasure that goes along with it. And he figures if he can't have the gold and he can't have the pleasure, he might as well swear off these things, pleasure and desire, and therefore get the gold. And he does. And he steals the gold from them. Well, this gold goes from hand to hand to hand for 19 hours. Anybody who gets it has bad luck with it. And at the very end is Valhalla, the palace of the gods, goes up in flames. The end of Götterdämmerung, the 4th of these operas. What happens to the gold? It is returned to the Rhine maidens. So they are, oh my goodness, bookends. A technique, bookends that Eliot loves in this poem for the entirety of the Wagner Ring. So the nymphs, let me go back to the text. The nymphs are departed. I guess that's leaving us with an empty brown land next to the water. It's got a slimy bank. There's a river's tent. Maybe it's a tent. Maybe it's a geological formation on the river. Is broken, and the nymphs are departed. Do the nymphs departing have anything to do with the tent being broken? Is the sliminess of the bank something we are meant to feel for more than pictorial reasons? Then you got, sweet Thames runs softly till I end my song. That's a quote. And it's a quote that anybody who was educated in poetry in 1922, which meant anybody who was educated for the most part, quote that they would recognize. This is a poem everybody read in English class, the end of high school or in college. It's a poem by Sir Edmund Spenser. Spelled with an S, not a C, Spenser. And it's called Prothalamion. Let's take a little look at some lines from Prothalamion. That's how it's spelled. Thalamos refers in general as a metaphor to wedding. He wrote a prothalamion, poem to read before the wedding, and an epithalamion, one of the most extraordinary poems ever written in English, and to which I will turn my attention at some time in the future for you. Epithalamion upon. It's not just wedding, the image is the marriage bed. The whole idea is to getting married is to procreate, and that's how you defeat time, by having more of you carry on after you're dead in the bodies of your children. So here is a poem he writes looking forward to the wedding. And he married at a relatively advanced age. He was, I think, pushing 50. And he married, I believe, a 26-year-old. So it was quite an event. And he chose June 21st as the wedding day. That's kind of an in-joke. What day did he choose? The longest day and the shortest night of the year. If you're an old man like that, you can't keep up with a young lady for too long, so you might as well have the shortest night. Well, maybe I'm reading too much in. Here is the first stanza of this poem, which has 10 stanzas to it. When did Spenser write? He was alive when Shakespeare was alive. So with Spenser, we add now to Shakespeare, we add to Queen Elizabeth, and the Elizabethan era is brought to mind so that it can be juxtaposed with the era of the wasteland. And the Elizabethan era is constantly shown to us here as an era that is deeply romantic and deeply passionate and deeply appreciative of nature and nature at its most functioning best. Here we are. Calm was the day, and through the trembling air sweet-breathing zephyrs did softly play. A gentle spirit that lightly did delay hot Titan's beams, which then did glister fair. When I, whose sullen care, through discontent of my long fruitless stay in prince's court, and expectation vain of idle hopes, which still do fly away like empty shadows, did afflict my brain, walked forth to ease my pain, along the shore of silver streaming Thames, whose rutty bank the which his river hems was painted all with variable flowers, and all the meads adorned with dainty gems, fits to deck maidens' bowers and crown their paramours. Against the bridal day, which is not long, sweet Thames, run softly till I end my song. There are 10 stanzas. They all end with those last 2 lines. So that's a refrain. I'm going to show you something kind of interesting. Spenser wrote a whole lot of sonnets, as did Sidney, as did Shakespeare, as did whole lots of people back in the Elizabethan era. It was an Italian poetic form that was brought over 20 years before Shakespeare. And Shakespeare brought it to its absolute height, but Spenser and Sidney were no mean sonneteers themselves. They write long cycles of them. And with a sonnet, you've got 14 lines. And in the English or Elizabethan version of the sonnet, as opposed to the Italian, it was arranged as 4 lines, 4 lines, 4 lines, 2 lines. And the 4 lines were usually rhymed in an alternating rhyme scheme, A, B, A, B, and then C, D, C, D, and then E, F, E, F. That was Shakespeare's choice. And then a rhyming couplet to end it, G, G. Spenser liked using the 4-line structure that was part of the Italian 8-line structure, where he would rhyme the first and fourth lines and the second and third lines. And what do we have here? Air, play, delay, fair. There's 4 lines with a Spenserian quatrain, and they're all 5 beats long. Comes the day, and who, a gentle, fair, light, is likely to delay. And then you get like a punctuation mark, a 3-beat line. When I, who sullen care. So this quatrain is over, and there's a 3-beat line. Now, wouldn't mean anything if it didn't happen again. Stay, vain, away, brain. Here's another quatrain, and it is in that same rhyme scheme. And when it's finished, walk forth to ease my pain. A 3-beat line of punctuation, if you will. And then another quatrain, Thames, hems, flowers, gems. Oh, he fools around with the rhyme. It's not E, F, E, F. It's E, E, F, E. Interesting. But it is 4 lines that rhyme and are a unit. And then fit to deck maidens' bowers. Now, how do I know that's 3 beats instead of 4? Fit to deck maidens' bowers. Because it's in the place where the other 3-beat lines were. And what do we get next? A repeat of the 3 beats. And crown their paramours. So it's got to be 3 beats when you perform it. So you get 4 lines of a quatrain, punctuation 3 beats, 4 lines, punctuation 3 beats, 4 lines, punctuation 3 beats, punctuation 3 beats, and then you're set up for the rhymed couplet, which never varies from stanza to stanza for 10 stanzas. Against the bridal day, which is not long. Sweet Thames, run softly till I end my song. You want to see it again? Here's one of the others. Follow the form this time. Look for the rhyme and look for the 4 lines and the 3-beat line. 4 lines and the 3-beat line. Ye gentle birds, the world's fair ornament, and heaven's glory, whom this happy hour doth lead unto your lover's blissful bower, joy may you have and gentle heart's content of your love's compliment. And let fair Venus, that is queen of love, with her heart-quelling sun upon you smile, whose smile, they say, hath virtue to remove all love's dislike and friendship's faulty guile, for ever to assoil. Let endless peace your steadfast hearts accord, and blessed plenty wait upon your board, and let your bed with pleasures chaste abound, that fruitful issue may to you afford, which may your foes confound, and make your joys redound. Upon your bridal day, which is not long, sweet Thames, run softly till I end my song. So if that is a taste of Spenser's Prothalamion, joy of the marriage bed because it's a chaste bed. Only virgins hither high. And the Thames is lovely and sweet, and the song is singing, and the flowers are adorning, and everything is gorgeous. And let's go back to where this is the wasteland. A moment to edit out. Get that, Barbara?
What?
A one moment to edit out.
Oh, okay.
Note it.
Okay.
Okay. Let's go back to the wasteland. You got the broken river's tent. You got the last fingers of leaf. Stuff is dead. It's fallen. It's old. It's gone. It's not beginning. It's not joyous. It's not wedding. Clutch and sink into the wet bank. The wind crosses the brown land on. The nymphs are departed. Sweet Thames, run softly till I end my song. Is this the Thames? Is this the Thames today? We are brought back to the Thames in Elizabethan England by the reference to Spenser, which brings with it all of its flowers and sun and wetness. We continue. The river bears no empty bottles, sandwich papers, silk handkerchiefs, cardboard boxes, cigarette ends, or the testimony of summer nights. The nymphs are departed, and their friends, the loitering heirs of city directors, departed, have left no addresses. This is a garbage-cluttered Thames. Instead of the nymphs being the Rhine maidens, or in this case, the Thames maidens, they're nymphomaniac types who have been having sexual orgies at night with the city directors, with people who could afford to hire them for the whole evening. And a bunch of these people go down to the Thames. And now we have a good reason for there being a tent or two. Little privacy, please. And signs of the evening's festivities, the cigarette boxes, and somebody lost her silk handkerchief. That's what's floating around in the Thames, polluting it, it seems. So when the nymphs are departed comes the first time, and when the nymphs are departed comes the second time, the same line, it means differently because of what's come in between the two appearances of that line. These are different nymphs. These are dirtier nymphs. And the city directors, they too are departed. So this is one evening of sex and then it's over. They don't even stay in contact. How do I know they don't stay in contact? Well, because let me get it back up. Thank you. Because the next lines departed have left no addresses. They didn't even exchange phone numbers. Now, juxtapose this orgiastic scene, the leftovers the next morning, with the slimy bed, the slimy bank, the junk in the river, the Spencer's prothalamion, and you've got a richer poem. No, that's not just a line that occurs and shows that he's well read, which is what people have accused Eliot of, being elitist. I'm putting in stuff that you have to be educated to be able to know where it comes from. Ha ha. And if you know, you get 2 points for knowing Spencer's prothalamion. No, you go back and grab the prothalamion and juxtapose it to the Thames of the wasteland. Now you got something. You've got a disgust that you didn't have before. By the waters of Layman, I sat down and wept. Sweet Thames, run softly till I end my song. Sweet Thames, run softly, for I speak not loud or long. But at my back in a cold blast I hear the rattle of the bones and chuckle spread from ear to ear. So we've got what waters before us? We got the Thames, we got the Rhine from Wagner, we got the seashore from Shakespeare's The Tempest, we got wetness from the Hyacinth Garden. And now we have the term layman capitalized. What's layman? Well, it refers to the waters of Babylon, made famous in Psalm 137, by the waters of Babylon. Yea, we hanged our harps and wept when we remembered Zion. And kicked out of your country, and by the waters of some foreign country, all you could do is remember a more wondrous, heartwarming, identificatory body of water that you used to have but don't have anymore. What a nice parallel to the Thames, once being Elizabethan and now being with cardboard, cigarette boxes, silk handkerchiefs. But there is another body, Leman, of water. Lake Leman is in, guess where? Geneva. So Eliot's writing this poem and perhaps gazing out over Lake Leman, where he is weeping. He is trying to recover his spirits and more of his stability. I won't say sanity, but stability. So by the waters of Layman, there we sat down and wept. Sweet Thames, run softly till I end my song. There is a return of Spencer. In case it didn't have enough effect being once, bringing it back twice is bookends, again for this little passage, like the nymphs departing, having been bookends. And then he repeats it, but it loses some of its Elizabethan gentillesse, some of its Elizabethan sensibility and loveliness. Sweet Thames, run softly till I end my song. Sweet Thames, run softly, for I speak not loud or long. It's a much clunkier line. And I speak not loud, I speak not long, These are prosaic kinds of concerns more than poetic. So the poetry has dropped out of the Spencer line, or at least it is decaying. It is disintegrating. Keep that in mind, please. Elizabethan glory, disintegrating before your eyes by something happening to the poetry. This is extremely significant, folks. I must say, I've read so much on the wasteland. I've never read anybody who's just made that point, who's made the point that I just made. And it's a very small point, but wait till next time when it's going to blossom and explode. Let me go back to our text before we run out of time. I'm sorry. Barbara?
Yes, sir.
That's another
Right.
editing moment. But at my back in a cold blast, I hear the rattle of the bones and chuckle spread from ear to ear. Now, can you hear the rhyming couplets? His whole section of Eliot's was all rhyming couplets, and Pound left some in. But if you look even at the gray lines on our screen here, papers, ends, departed, directors, addresses, wept, no rhymes. Song long, hear, ear. Rhyming couplets. And the fact that long rhymes with song and that one's a very poetic line and the other's not so, the rhyme is fighting with the lack of poetry in the second line. At my back in a cold blast, I hear the rattle of the bones and chuckle spread from ear to ear. What do I hear in this? But at my back, I always hear. There's a very famous poem that everybody in Eliot's day who was educated would know. Everybody educated in my day, 30 or 40 years later, would know this poem. Every high school kid would try to memorize at least part of it. It's Andrew Marvell to his coy mistress. It begins with this coyness. If we had both enough and time, this coyness lady would be no crime. Guy trying to make it with his girl, and she's saying no. Important that you know that's going on in that poem, because the reference to the poem would bring it back here. This is such a reference that when it comes in a second time, he's doing two at a time. Eliot gives us a note with a little quotation. And the lines that are quoted here is first whole stanza, long stanza. If we had world enough in time, it would be fine for you to quote me off. I mean, I would start praising you. I'd spend 2 eons on your forehead. I'd spend a century for each eye. He would work his way over the body as the Italians used to do in praising their women. And the second stanza says, but at my back, I always hear time's winged chariot hurrying near. Time says, hurry up, please. It's time. Hurry up, please. It's time. At my back, I hear it. And it says, grab desire while ye may. The grave's a fine and quiet, private place. but none I fear do their embrace. Marvel goes on to say. So we have a little marvel. But at my back, in a cold blast, not warm, not spring, not Zephyrus, the west wind in the spring, I hear, what a rattle of the bones. These are the roots that clutch, the rattle of the bones that are in the water of the dead men. Those are pearls that were his eyes. Remember these words. They're going to be recapitulated shortly and much later in the poem. And chuckles spread from ear to ear. Well, cold blast, it's horrible. Chuckle from ear to ear. If you had no flesh left on your face at all, and it was just a skull, it looks like the chuckle might extend from ear to ear. And that's the end of the stanza graph. Well, I tell you what, that's a fair amount already. Next time, we will look. I want to read them because the lines go with what we've done. We're by this slimy bank with the orgy from last night. A rat crept softly through the vegetation, dragging its slimy belly on the bank. You hear the reproduction of previous lines in this short section. While I was fishing in the dull canal, boy, is that going to be important. On a winter evening, not the spring, round behind the gas house, what a detail, musing upon the king my brother's wreck, and on the king my father's death before him, where we heard about that before. White bodies naked on the low damp ground, and bones cast in a little low dry garret, rattled by the rat's foot only year to year. But at my back from time to time I hear the sound of horns and motors, which shall bring Sweeney to Mrs. Porter in the spring. Oh, the moon shone bright on Mrs. Porter, and on her daughter they washed their feet and sowed a water. Et aussi voix d'enfant chantant dans le coupole. That's what we have to look forward to start off next time, followed by a little education, further education in sonnet form. See you then. Bye now.